And I'm going to be honest with you, I've read the whole document. It's not stupid. Donald Trump's strategy in 2017 was not stupid. It is just impossible. Stupid and impossible are two separate things. Fully 20 years ago, in the year 2000, who ruled Afghanistan? The correct answer is, of course, the Taliban. Now, suppose I were to ask you, just 1 year from now, in the far-off, distant future of 2020, who will rule Afghanistan? Increasingly, newspapers are reporting that the correct answer will be the Taliban. And for some of us, after more than $1 trillion in military expenditure over 18 years of constant warfare, that may be a very difficult answer to accept. Now, to really tell this story, I've got to go back to the beginning. And I don't mean the year 2001, and I don't mean the 1970s. No. Let's go all the way back to August 21st, 2017. August 21st, 2017 was the day that Donald Trump announced on his own website, oh yes, and let's not forget Twitter, quote, "Our troops will fight to win. From now on, victory will have a clear definition. Attacking our enemies, obliterating ISIS, crushing Al-Qaeda, preventing the Taliban from taking over Afghanistan, and stopping mass terror attacks. Someday, after an effective military effort, perhaps it will be possible to have a political settlement that includes elements of the Taliban in Afghanistan. We are not nation building again, period. We are killing terrorists." Close quote. And notice here the way CNN put a headline on that. Trump declares U.S. will win. The United States will, quote unquote, win in Afghanistan, but gives few details. So the level of cynicism that had set in by the year 2017 in reporting this. Now, it's not really so much that this strategy declares that the United States will win. It's really sort of addressed to a hypothetical parallel universe in which the United States already had won. If you think about the wording there, it's possible that, after an effective military effort, possibly they'll let in elements of the Taliban to rule. Let's just take a quick look at a map here. According to most sources, the Taliban now occupies more territory in Afghanistan than they have at any point since the year 2004. A few sources go further and claim that the Taliban actually controls more territory within Afghanistan now than they did in the year 2001. I don't know how reliable that is. The Taliban aren't just winning. The Taliban have won. Full stop, period. And that's what this map shows. So it's not the case that in engaging in negotiations today, Donald Trump is negotiating from a position of power. He is negotiating over the evacuation of United States troops after they have been defeated. And most of Trump's strategy, and actually even most of the expert opinion in the press, as we're going to see, is instead addressed to this very peculiar parallel universe. Let's just briefly glance over these headlines. I know these are shallow, guys, but it gives you a sense. These are massacres and victories that the Taliban accomplished during the negotiations with Donald Trump in just the last couple of weeks. American soldiers killed during Afghan operation. That's one way to describe it. This took place March 22nd as the U.S. holds talks with Taliban to end the war. Taliban haven't just won, they're continuing to score more victories. Oh yes, and they're not just battlefield victories, they're not just combat victories. This headline from March 23rd is in effect a terrorist attack carried out by the Taliban against Afghan people at the Farmers' Day event in Helmand province. So that also is going on unchecked. March 30th, explosion, Taliban attacks killed dozens across Afghanistan. At least 25 Afghan security forces killed in separate attacks. Also a terrorist attack killing students there. Afghan vice president narrowly escapes Taliban attack, March 31st. These stories are actually bigger in scale. Taliban encircles government compound, kills dozens. They killed 32 soldiers and policemen within 48 hours in that assault. As I recall, yes, and this other attack, you get to see on the map here where they're distributed geographically. March 17th, Afghan troops killed and captured, 22 dead, more than 100 flee. So, again, let's just look at the map, and let's consider the geopolitical context, the military reality of the context that Donald Trump is negotiating from. So, look, guys, things have changed. Things have changed. The policy statement made by Donald Trump way back in August of 2017, that set out a strategy. And I'm going to be honest with you, I've read the whole document. It's not stupid. Donald Trump's strategy in 2017 was not stupid. It is just impossible. Stupid and impossible are two separate things. 2017 plan, in sum, was 1. Fewer troops. 2. More victory. 3. Leave without nation building. 4. Kill all the terrorists. And 5, paradoxically, compromise with the Taliban. Just quote unquote, make a deal. And the strangest thing about that last claim, it's wildly incompatible with the idea of leaving the country without nation building. It's incompatible with killing all the terrorists. Who are the terrorists, if not the Taliban? It's really built on this very strange assumption that the Taliban could be partly in power. And I think nobody really wants to face up to the fact that the Taliban have been playing a game for the last 18 years that was all or nothing. Win or lose, live or die. They've been playing by those stakes. They've gotten real used to it. And the United States is not in a position to offer them a power-sharing arrangement or just a few seats in parliament or minority party status in elections. They've won. The Taliban have already occupied the country. They're already in control. They're winning. They're scoring new victories even during the negotiations. They understand that the United States wants certain conditions before they evacuate, but they also understand that one way or another, the United States will evacuate, and when that happens, there is no possibility of the Taliban being partly in power, and there is no possibility whatsoever of the Taliban allowing elections. Neither the elections of their competitors, nor do they wish to be elected themselves. I went over the reports of what was said in the Trump negotiations. Should we call them the Trump-Taliban negotiations? What else am I going to call it? I did not see any mention of elections whatsoever. There were some promises that the United States was asking the Taliban to make. I did not see elections even being on the table. Now, it's obviously we don't have a complete transcript. It's possible that the elections were raised, and it's possible that the Taliban just laughed out loud in their faces. I don't know. Because let me tell you something. You might have missed it. It has not been very long since the last elections in Afghanistan. They didn't get a whole lot of press coverage, but let me just throw this up on screen real quick here. Yeah, they had elections, and the Taliban made bold declarations like this one. Taliban announced, quote, "These elections have no Islamic or Afghan essence. They are just a foreign plot to prolong the occupation." And they said further, it was the duty of every Afghan and every Muslim to oppose them. So do you imagine that the Trump-Taliban negotiations will fundamentally change the situation? And the other thing is, look, obviously I'm morally opposed to the Taliban, and I morally support democracy, voting, freedom of speech, these kinds of things. But on a purely Machiavellian, analytical level, does anyone think the Taliban are incorrect here? Do you think that the Taliban statement that these elections are un-Islamic and are an attempt to subvert their traditional Islamic Taliban style of government, attempt to get rid of Sharia law and traditional Muslim rule, does anyone think? Does anyone disagree? Does anyone really think that the American orchestrated elections are not a foreign plot to prolong the U.S. military occupation? That's exactly what they are. And guess what? The Taliban have other methods of taking over the government. And in effect, the Taliban's election promise is there will be no more elections. That is a very profound commitment the Taliban have made. So the other thing I've got to say is, some of you might be shocked that I said Donald Trump's 2017 strategy, which he's now abandoning. That's why we're making this video. He's abandoned that strategy in these elections. I said that it was not stupid. It was merely impossible. Here's what stupid looks like. And this guy's an expert. Ahmed Charai, if I may attempt to pronounce his name. He concludes this long analysis, I read it all so you don't have to, with, finally, the biggest mistake of retreating superpowers is to not define a desired end state. President Trump should say that he envisions a multi-party democracy, one in which the Taliban is simply one party peacefully contending for power with others. Oh, you figured it out! The United States never thought of that. They never thought that they could just end the war by reassuring the Taliban that they could have elections and the Taliban could lose. Oh, nobody ever proposed this in the peace negotiations. Oh, we're living in a parallel universe where the Taliban are a tiny, powerless faction who think the best they could do is get 5 seats in the House of Parliament. Is that the parallel universe you're living in? It's completely out of touch with reality, ludicrous, insane. But these are the types of people who are foreign policy experts. These are the types of people who are going around saying that they know so much more than Donald Trump, that this former reality TV star and game show host, he can't possibly deal with the complexities of the Afghan war. This is 2019. We are 18 years deep. And it seems like the very basic concept that the Taliban are against elections, that their desire, their objective is not to be a minority party in a House of Commons with free and fair, pluralistic democracy and debate. Not really the Taliban's vision of the future. So this is the world we live in. And I think you guys know Western interest in and concern about the Taliban hit a peak in maybe 2002, and it's been on the wane ever since. I really cannot remember any coverage of the elections that at least started in 2018 in Afghanistan. In some ways, they were still going on, still being wrapped up in 2019. I think it would be fair to say that they have been ignored in principle and ignored in their consequences. So, guys, I try not to do this to you too much. I try not to tug at your heartstrings. This is a straight political analysis channel, but this is the other more emotional side of things that I don't see in the Western press, and of course it shows what a joke and how insincere our commitment to feminism is. Here's an Indian newspaper, The Hindu. Mariam Yusuf, an Afghan medical professional, shared her concerns with this writer. Quote, "I do fear about the Taliban coming back to power in Afghanistan, having already lived through and escaped that hell once before." Close quote. She said, during the Taliban years, Ms. Yusuf had watched her elderly mother being lashed publicly by the group's morality police for not covering her face. Quote, "My mother was a very religious lady who prayed 5 times a day, and yet they beat, humiliated, and abused her for not being faithful. We left a few months after that incident." Close quote. She recalled, adding that there is a genuine fear among many women that they might once again be forced to leave the country. Agreeing with Ms. Hamidi, Ms. Yusuf added that she does foresee a stronger resistance from Afghans were the Taliban to return. Quote, "The thing that makes me optimistic is that the whole country is more aware and connected. People know about their basic rights. Women and youth know about the rights they deserve and are willing to fight for it." It's tragic. The optimism, the false hope is tragic. Guess what? Obama was elected on hope. $1 trillion US, 18 years of warfare from what's regarded as the world's most professional and effective military. You're willing to fight for it. Oh, really? The U.S. Marine Corps was willing to fight for it, and they lost. It's touching. It's genuinely touching to imagine that the women of Afghanistan who value the right to vote are now going to stand up and fight for it against the Taliban. U.S. Marine Corps lost. The U.S. Marine Corps is packing up and going home. You don't stand a chance. The best you can do is run And anyone who looks at a map will tell you it's not real easy to say where it is you can run to. The consequences of these foreign policy choices are deadly serious. And the other one we haven't touched on this channel much yet is what's going to happen to the Kurds now that Trump is packing up and ending U.S. Foreign policy support for independent Kurdistan, however you want to put it. These things have a real price in blood. I can think of a lot of ways in the United States to spend $1 trillion. I can think of a lot of ways for them to even spend $1 trillion in Afghanistan to have better outcomes than this. But nobody asked me. And you know who they asked. You know under the George W. Bush presidency. You know who was in the room. Who was in the brains trust? Who was doing the brainstorms? Who was standing there in front of the whiteboard? Well, I can think of about 3 options here, and 2 of them are the atom bomb. So I close this quotation. Even if the Taliban comes to power, it will face a lot of resistance. It will not be easy for it to control Afghans. We will see. But the loss of the female right to vote is only one side of the story. There's also the loss of everyone's right to vote because the Taliban do not tolerate elections. At all levels of the press, including fairly elite political analysis, I see 2 different types of spin being put on the story, and I think they're mostly just pandering to the audience, trying to make this into a feel-good story instead of a feel-bad story. I think we can all agree this video you've just sat through is unbearably grim. Wouldn't it be nice if someone could put a spin on it? I don't know, some kind of happy ending. But there is really no happy ending to be found. One type of spin is this suggestion that what's happening now in Afghanistan is a perfect parallel to what happened at the end of the Vietnam War. And I think this is an attempt to make the audience feel good about themselves because this has been bandied about as a sort of truism since September 11th, 2001, that if America invaded Afghanistan, it would just be like Vietnam all over again. So a lot of people get to sit back and feel sort of proud of themselves and say, oh, I told you so. I've been saying it since 2001. It would just be like Vietnam all over again. And the worst aspect of that attitude of all, in my opinion, is that it reveals the extent to which Americans are not merely kidding themselves about what's happening today in Afghanistan, but also the extent to which they're still lying to themselves about how and why the Vietnam War ended when it did, what happened militarily and geopolitically at the end of the Vietnam War. I've written a long article about this. I know that nobody is going to click on the link below this video to go and read that article, but let me tell you something. There's a real sense in which the Vietnam War didn't end. The Vietnam War simply turned into the Cambodian War. What had been a struggle of the CIA against the Vietnamese became instead a struggle of the CIA, the Chinese, and Pol Pot, the Cambodians, all working together against the Vietnamese. So there's a very real sense in which the Vietnam War didn't end. It simply carried on through other means, through a bizarre foreign policy. Some people call it the strategic triangle. And that is the policy that Nixon was so proud of himself about. He always seems strangely proud about this plan he devised with the Chinese to end the Vietnam War. And still in 2019, people are strangely in a state of denial about it. And then there's this. This is the more subtle and disgraceful form of self-deception that people in the mainstream press seem to be indulging in. And it's scary to me to think that people who really have an education in political science, and maybe people in the halls of power, are engaging in this kind of self-deception too. So, second paragraph on screen here. Quote, for the Taliban, an agreement on the withdrawal of American troops would guarantee something of a victory. Something of a victory? Something of a victory, he says, in their military struggle. After 18 years of fighting, they would have forced American troops to leave. Okay, close quote. Stop. What do you mean, something of a victory? How is it possible that in 2019, with the stakes so high, with this being a question of life and death, not just for the abstract principle of democracy, but for anyone who's secular, free-thinking, modern-minded people in Afghanistan, 35 million people, and we're going to sit around and kid ourselves. What do you mean something of a victory? This is it. This is the end. This is the defeat of the American side. This is the victory of the Taliban. And as it says here in the first sentence, the Taliban are in a position where they don't even need to negotiate. They can wait for the clock to run down because they know, with or without a treaty, with or without an agreement, they've already won the war. And it seems that nobody was really prepared for this scenario. What if the United States loses and leaves? And so we're still at this first step of asking this question. What happens next? What happens now? Not when the Taliban have had something of a victory. When they have, against all odds, against a $1 trillion military budget, when they have in fact won.
I mean, really, people like to disrespect my crew, but the fact is that you know my name and I don't know you.